services that we're providing for you. They're there simply because we love you and we want to be a blessing to you. If you'd like to find out more information, you can look at www.livingmanna.net and you can find a abundance of information that'll give you access to a smorgasbord of a lot of different subjects. We try to share the Torah portions each week, and there are times we pick particular subjects to share, but I really enjoy the Torah portions because they're daily, weekly blueprints. It teaches us about where we're at and where we're living. And if there was ever a season when we need to know where we're headed, first of all, it's hard to know where you're going if you don't know where you're at. So amen. Turn to your neighbor and say, hey, baby, where you at? If you don't know where you're at, it's hard to understand where you're headed. But you know, this is what these roadmaps are for. It gives you an idea where you can kind of get your bearings, and it prepares you for life. And it's inevitable. We understand that there's some dark days ahead of us. We know that. But I believe with all my heart that Father's preparing the people that are going to be able to come through this thing on the other side. And when we come through on the other side, we're going to look like Him. Amen. And I really appreciate what the Apostle John said. He said, I don't really understand what I look like, but I know when I see Him, I look like Him. Right. And that's a pretty powerful statement because if you look at what's going on around us, there's a whole lot of flesh in the community that calls themselves believers. There's a lot of strife. There's a lot of division. They're jockeying for positions, and that's just among leadership. And that's not even talking about what some of the folks out in Laodicea are doing. Amen? And when you start seeing these things, it kind of gives you an indication we've got a little growing up. Amen. Well, if we realize that the Father is going to come and deliver His people, which is what this Torah portion is about, is delivering us from Egypt. And you go back and look at the conditions that the children of Israel were in, just the Torah portion, they've gotten hard. Now, you know that bondage, vis-a-vis your flesh, where we find ourselves most often wallowing in comfort. And we don't like, because we're humans, we really don't like change, right? We like things to continue, so we don't like to rock the boat. We don't like for anybody to call attention to where we are, so that we have to kind of plumb ourselves up and then straighten up. See what I'm saying? But these Torah portions are here as indicators to teach us that we've got some growing up to do. And if you look at what's going to happen in this particular Torah portion today, there's literally a testament here regarding not only how Yahweh delivered the children of Israel from the hands of Pharaoh, and I believe that Pharaoh is alive and well today. Amen? And I did a teaching a number of years ago called The Last Pharaoh, and we believe that the last Pharaoh that will appear on the scene is none other than the anti-Messiah himself. But there are others that have that same spirit. Had on him that are least going to cry us. I want, we're not going to get set. Say amen. And if you go back and read the text, you'll find that until the children of Israel cried out because of their bondage, too difficult. I want you to look with me at this Torah portion. It begins in Exodus chapter 10, verse 1, and runs through chapter 13, verse 16. The title of the Torah portion is Bo. It's kind of a sort of like shalom. Shalom can mean hello. Or it's kind of interesting when you look at it because we're talking about going in unto you're going, and Father wants you to go into that Pharaoh. And He wants you to make the declaration, let my people go. And until you're willing to muster up and stand up underneath that responsibility and to do that, there's people around you, first of all, you're not going to deliver. Well, Well, what to me is intriguing about this portion is that it's a contrast between the will of Pharaoh and Moshe. And if you study it, it's quite interesting to me because it seems as if these two gentlemen were raised in the same house, probably by this Pharaoh's father. And so they knew each other relatively well. And when I began to look at it, you may be one of those that, like me, can see this, but a lot of people want to acknowledge that this conflict here is literally a battle between two distinct seed lines, the seed of Yahweh and the seed of the serpent, raised in the same house. Now, that's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? Because it leads me to believe that if we're in this house now, then there should be the same battle going on in this house as well, between the two seed lines. And the interesting thing about it is that the counterfeit seed line looks so much like the genuine until, if you're not careful, if you're not familiar with Yahweh, familiar with Him is through His Word, then you are going to miss the leading indicators that are about to begin to reveal themselves to show you that you are supposed to be busy accomplishing the will of the Father to set people free. Amen? Amen. Guys, something's happened to the sound here, it seems. Can y'all hear me? Is it still coming out of the... Okay. Now, I want to look a little bit further. If you look at this phrase where it says that Yahweh said to Moshe, the phrase is al Moshe Bo al Pharaoh. Now, when I'm studying the Torah, I look at a number of different things. I like to look at the Hebrew letters, and everybody knows that Hebrew is an alphanumeric language. That's not rocket science. And quite often, I don't mind saying this, quite often I get accused of being one of those that delves in the Kabbalistic teachings, the mystical writings, because I look at the numeric values of the letters. But Yahweh's the one that created this, not me. Okay? And I will free people that delve into the mystical side of things, into Kabbalah, which is literally taking the what you should stay away from. But just because they understand that there are some symbols of truth to be found in areas. Does that make sense to you? Yes. Smile and nod, we're going to be here, okay? And looking at this, I thought these numeric values that you see in this Torah portion, the letters have value. We heard last week that the number 7 and last was very, and I got to look at it 7 places. The Shebo al Pharaoh has a numeric value of 345. And, Moshe has a value of 340. Pharaoh is 55. Now, the definition, if you look at it, I want you to understand that it's going to contrast to personality. You've taught all your life that Moshe was the one coming out of the water. You've got the big bulrushes, and you get that picture of one that was floating in the basket on the Nile River, and that's how he got his name. He was named because he was taken out of the basket or out of the water. But that's not what the Hebrew meaning is. Moshe literally means one from out of whom the water was drawn. Okay? Puts a little different spin on it. In fact, if you study Moshe, you understand that he's a shadow picture of Yeshua, and Yeshua is a living water. And so Moshe is a shadow or a cistern that water or living water will be stored in, and therefore you can draw out of it. In fact, the multitudes of Israel drew out of Moshe just like they drew out of the rock while they were in the wilderness. And so that's a picture of Moshe. If you look at the word Moshe, it could also be defined as meaning to draw out. Now I want you to remember this. If I'm drawing something out, I'm taking it out of its particular location. Well, Moshe is the one that was responsible for drawing Israel out of Egypt. And so another definition of this word Moshe is a rescuer. It could also indicate one who would turn aside or it's known for having turned aside out of his way to go see a burning bush. at the word Pharaoh, Pharaoh. It's translated as his great house. And again, it's a contrast between the house of Yahweh and the house of Pharaoh. In contrast, in opposition, there's conflict, there's a raging battle. There's a battle that you see here in the natural, but what we don't understand is going on as well. And if you understood what was happening during that particular time in the stellar heavens, you would have understood that the particular constellation at that time was the house of the bull, Pharaoh, in the heavens. And it was making its change to the house of God. So that you can see that there's a war in the heavens, a war in the spirit realm, while there's a war going on in the natural. These things are not just accidents. The word Pharaoh has a numeric value of 300, and I thought, isn't that interesting? Because there's another word of equivalent value, the word Nashah, and that word Nashah means to force. And it's not simply because you're an absent-minded individual. Turn to your neighbor and tell them that may be your problem. Okay? It literally means to intentionally. There's something now that's in front of me that's been getting my attention. I say, no, I am not. You forget, you put you out of my mind, out of sight, out of mind. Okay? That's what that word. But it also and or borrow, and it happens that this word Nashah, and when you see these numeric values, they say, you think, oh, that's kind of these numeric values. Also, then understanding to what's going on here. Being the root of Joseph's son, but now they're going to be delivered out of Egypt. Am I right? And wasn't it said of this Pharaoh that he did not know Joseph? Now, and I told you who Joseph was, it was that he Nashah Joseph. He intentionally put Joseph out of his mind. He intentionally chose to forget Joseph. Does that make sense? Yeah. Well, that's what's happening here. And if you study this, you see that there's a contrast. Why? Because this Pharaoh has intentionally forgotten Joseph, put him out of his mind, but Moshe is here to rescue or to draw out those that have been forgotten. Isn't that amazing? 400 some odd years in bondage, you've seen that Yahweh's forgotten. And there's a lot of times that we cry out, Father, have you forgotten where I'm at? I have people that ask me all the time, how do I know what's happening in my life? And it seems as if right in the middle of great catastrophe or calamity in my life that Father's forgotten me. But I've got news for you. He knows where you're at. He hasn't forgotten you. Did you think that he's a doddering old fool sitting on some kind of an antiquated throne that just happened to have forgotten you, even though he's wrote you on the palm of his hand and made a mental note? Let me write your name here so I don't forget you. No. You're one of the forgotten ones. The rest of the world, the rest of creation may have forgotten you. It may seem as if you're isolated, if you're the only one like Elijah on the backside of the desert. Yahweh has not forgotten you. You have to remember that. The word Bo, it indicates to go in, to enter the calls to come near. And it just happens that this is the 15th parsha of the year, 3 times 5. The word Bo has a numeric value of 9, 3 times 3. Isn't that amazing? The word Moshe has a simple gematria of 345, right? 3 plus 4 plus 5 is 12. 3 times 4, there's that number 3 again. And if you were to look at the total gematria of Al Moshe Bo Al Pharaoh, its total gematria is 771, and it just happens it's divisible by 3. Coincidental, strictly an accident, doesn't fit with this parsha, has no merit, it really doesn't have a place in this kind of study. In fact, it's too deep. You shouldn't go that deep in the Word. Well, my goodness, I would think that His Word should be there in front of you, sort of like you can be filled to the level of your hunger. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Messiah said himself, blessed are they that just happen, they'll just get salad. Excuse me. He said, blessed are, well, it seems to me that if you have a passion and appetite, have a thirst, then Yahweh told you, how can I be blessed? My thirst is to be satisfied. Why? This word. Vegetables of this word. Now it's really. As I said last week, we talked about the number 7. You know what did with those first 7 plagues? Isn't that ironic? We've got 3 plagues left in this part. And you have to ask yourself, is there a reason that Yahweh's sort of hidden these numbers in here? Do you think that maybe this number 3 would give some kind of an indication regarding what's going to happen between Moshe and Pharaoh? What if you don't know what the number 3 is in Hebrew? It won't mean anything to you. How many of you would like to know what Hebrew letter is represented by the number 3? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. The Gamel. Isn't that interesting? The pictograph. Every Hebrew letter is a picture. The pictograph of the Hebrew letter Gamel, or the number 3, was the camel. But it's interesting because this letter is said to serve as a bridge between people or ideas. And so you can say it this way. You have Aleph and Bet, right? First 2. Then the 3rd letter is Gamel. The 4th letter is a dot. So it seems then that the letter Gamel serves as a bridge between Aleph, Bet, and Dot, the doorway. The Hebrew letter Gamel then becomes a mediator. Are you listening? Well, what is Moshe doing here? Moshe's a mediator between what? The doorway and the house of Pharaoh. And what you find that's about to happen here in this Torah portion is that when you look at this word Gamel, it comes from another Hebrew word, Gamal, which indicates to recompense another in order to bring something to completion. In other words, I'm going to pay you off so I can satisfy a debt. Isn't that interesting? It indicates to mete out judgment. And so we see that if Moshe is in fact the type of Messiah, that Moshe is serving as a mediator between Yahweh, Israel, and Pharaoh. And Moshe is the arm of Yahweh that is about to complete the judgment, the plagues, if you will, that have been assigned to Egypt and Pharaoh. Does that make sense? Do you think maybe, and I just want to kind of shake you a little bit and rattle your chain, I want to ask you something. If we're part of this Torah portion, and it seems as if it's a shadow picture of you and I as well, because it should overlay us today. We ought to be operating in the same ministry. We should have the same ministry, in my opinion, that Moshe has. Those that the water's drawn out of. Am I right? And so that leads me to believe that you and I function as a mediator. It seems like I remember reading in the Brit Hadashah, New Testament, that we have the ministry of what? Reconciliation. Telling people that you can be reconciled to Yahweh. That means you're a mediator. But a mediator also can be the one that says, here's the judgment that comes as a recompense because of this dispute needing to be settled. So it also indicates that the words that you speak, if you're not careful to hear what I'm about to share with you, you won't understand the power of Yahweh's word that should be resonating inside of you. You have the ability to satisfy judgment in the earth between the enemy of Yahweh and your own household. Oh, that really, my household, and all hell's been vomited out on us, and I really need some relief. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is. Yeah, I can tell you, you've been really speaking to your mountain. Say amen right there. All right. The male serves to hint at lifting up something. And from a tribe, what lifts or elevates someone. And it seems to me that this is kind of apropos because what we're about to talk about next, Pharaoh's heart. And if you read this, it seems as if Pharaoh is a stiff-necked, arrogant, prideful individual. And he thought I was talking about you when I said that. I started getting uncomfortable. Oh, he's talking about us. But honestly, we are stiff-necked, arrogant individuals. We don't like Yahweh's word to change us. I'm telling you the truth, you know that. You know that's the truth. Well, who was the first one that demonstrated the trait of arrogance and pride and haughtiness? The Nakash, Hasatan. Isn't that ironic? If you ever look at the Hebrew, it just happens to have a numeric value 58, which is the same as the numeric value of the word Mashiach. So there's, you have one who's arrogant and prideful, but yet he tries to be a one that is the meekest individual that was ever born. And there's two houses there. There's Moses cited as the meekest man on the earth, and yet the one that's arrogant, prideful, and puffed up. Can you see this? And so now, the set here, even in the little number 3, Gamel, to give you an indicator that Yahweh's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And if you listen to a lot of the commentaries, when people are pulling these things out and looking at them, and they think, well, you know, and I just want to ask you your honest opinion. Sounds like old Pharaoh got a bad deal, didn't he? I mean, what kind of a chance did Pharaoh have? I mean, who are you to argue against Yahweh? If he's for you, then you're okay. But if he's against you, my goodness, if he's going to harden your heart, what hope is there? Why even try? If you read that, that's kind of what you seem to grasp from it. From it, Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, so there was really no hope for Yahweh. And then I read, on the other hand, contradictory scriptures that says that he's not willing that any should perish. And yet he hardened Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh got dealt a bad hand, saying, "Hear, O me." It seems like it, doesn't it? Until you start. Come on. In fact, there are 2 Hebrew words that are used for harden. The Hebrew word harden, to make something hard, means that you have kind of an action going along behind it. Either you heat or pressure. I want you to remember this, because when pressure's on, it's going to harden your heart or soften it. When the heat is on, it's going to harden your heart or soften it. But you think maybe this might have been what's happening to Pharaoh here? Let's look at the first word for hardened. It's in Exodus chapter 7, verse 13. It's the word chazak. It has that guttural chet. Say that, chazak. So, it means fail, to grow firm. If you're firm and resolute, that means that you've made up your mind about something. Hello? Can I ask you a question? How many of you have ever changed your mind? More than once. Just recently. How many of you plan on changing your mind anytime soon? You wouldn't be where you're at if you hadn't changed your mind, am I right? Yeah. Well, this word chazak, I want you to look at how it's spelled. It's spelled with a het, the zion, and the kush. If you look at the 2-letter root stem, the het, zion, that word is used to form a bunch of different other words that indicate to see or to perceive something. It indicates that you have the ability to see in the future. In other words, you're able to look at things around you and make a determination. Remember that. It's more than something that's just firm and resolute. It's indicating that you're able to see in the future, say, oh, this is happening, and I can tell that the end result is that it's going to be hardened. See what I'm saying? The next word for harden is the word kabod, or kabod, and it means to be heavy, weighty, grievous, glorious, to make dull or unresponsive. Now, we get our word glory or glorious from this word kabod, or kabod. And it's interesting, Yahweh is the one that declares that I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And once more I thought, man, Pharaoh's about to get a bad deal. Yahweh is intentionally himself going to harden a man's heart. Something's going on here. Yahweh singled this man out. He's predestined. This man is not going to make it into the kingdom. He's set him aside. He's intentionally hardened his heart. That's not what's happening, even though that's what it seems like from the King James English. In fact, again, if you look at that phrase, I will harden, or I have hardened, it's hikvadi, and it has a numeric value of 441, which is, again, divisible by 3. Just thought you'd see that. And so if you look at these two words, chazak and kavod, it becomes apparent that Yahweh didn't just arbitrarily harden the man's heart and condemn him out of hand. What it literally is saying is that Yahweh saw the end result and he sent a messenger with his word. Now I want you to pay attention here. Yahweh sent his word to Pharaoh. Pharaoh rejects the word. That wasn't good enough. Yahweh could have cut him off right there. As soon as he said, I don't want anything to do with this Yahweh, I don't know him, Yahweh could have cut him off. But because Yahweh is long-suffering, not willing that any should perish, Yahweh sends the judgments, hoping to turn Pharaoh around. You see that? And so what's happening here, when you look at this, by the way, the gematria or numeric value of kavod, it's 26. Same as Yahweh's name, Yod-Heh-Vav. And that kavod or kavod is associated with the glory or splendor, the heaviness is associated with the presence of Yahweh. And what you find is that when Yahweh appears, men's hearts are either going to soften or harden accordingly. And what you see happening here is that Yahweh didn't just arbitrarily out of hand harden Pharaoh's heart. Yahweh sent his word. Pharaoh rejects the word of Yahweh. And as a result of rejecting the word, his heart becomes hard. And so, yeah, you can say Yahweh had a hand in it. Why? Because he sent his word. Now, let me just share this with you. Yahweh's been sending his word to you. And if you don't do Yahweh's word, then like it or not, you've rejected that word. And now your heart's becoming hard. Are you listening to me? Yes. Have you looked at what's said over there in 2 Thessalonians when Yahweh says, in the last days, wait a minute, who said that? I'm going to send a strong delusion, yes, causing them to believe a lie. If you read the next sentence, it says, and be damned. Yes. Well, why would he send strong delusion, causing people to believe a lie? Literally cause their hearts to be hardened. Yes. Back up one verse, and it says, because they didn't love the truth. Yes. The same way with Pharaoh. So now it's okay. I see something's happened here. It's not that Yahweh arbitrarily hardens a man's heart. Yahweh sends the word, he rejects the word, and it's because of rejecting of the word that the heart becomes hard. Yes. Yes. And that's why you need to be careful to yield to the conviction of Yahweh, because when the conviction comes, it's there to prod you and provoke you, to get your attention, to get you to change. As we begin to reject the convicting presence of the Ruach, the Spirit of Yahweh, then we begin to get desensitized to it, and there will come a time in our life when we just flat don't get moved by it anymore. Amen? It's interesting because the numeric value of chazak and kavod, 141. It's divisible by 3. Now the rabbis teach that Yahweh did harden Pharaoh's heart, but he did it progressively. And the reason he did it progressively was because he progressively sent his word. He kept sending the word. He kept sending the word. And he kept rejecting it, rejecting it, and rejecting it. And because of that, his heart got harder in every instance that he met Moshe and heard the word. He rejected his heart got hardened. Let me share something with you. It starts out in Exodus chapter 5, verse 2. You remember when Moshe is introduced to Yahweh at the burning bush? Moshe says, who are you that I should go to the children of Israel and tell them that you are going to deliver them? And he says, Eshyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. I am that I am. Okay? And so he goes to Pharaoh and he tells Pharaoh the same thing. He says, Yahweh, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. The I am that was, will, and will be is going to deliver his people. He wants you to let his people go. Well, Pharaoh makes a statement there in Exodus 5:2, and he says, who is he? And it's not an interrogative here. It's not, excuse me, who is he? It's one of ridicule and sarcasm. excuse me? You don't understand Moshe, or evidently Moshe probably did. It's you and I that have the disconnect, because Moshe was considered the principal deity in Egypt. Pharaoh was considered the principal deity in Egypt. He was worshipped. And you had the audacity to come into my house, my place, where I worship, and to tell me that there is a supreme being that has more power than I do? Who is this Yahweh that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I don't know him, neither will I be obedient. That's how it starts out. That's a good way to get your heart hardened. And so, to understand this progressive hardening, you've got to go back and kind of recap. Do y'all mind if we recap the previous plagues? In Exodus chapter 7, verse 5, you see the first three. And everybody categorizes these in three. Isn't that interesting? That number 3 just keeps showing up. The first three are blood, frogs, and lice. And they occur, in my opinion, because Pharaoh just said, who is he? I don't know him, so Yahweh says, okay, dude, let me introduce myself. And so the first thing he does is he strikes the source of life in Egypt, which was the Nile River with blood, and causes the entire land to become Nidah. You see that? Now it's interesting, if you recall, the first 3 plagues fell on Israel and Egypt. You remember that? Now, if this pattern fits today, you can expect the plagues that you read about in the book of Revelation to fall on the house of Yahweh and the house of Egypt, both, because we're going to need that to provoke us to get our backs packed and get ready to get out of Dodge. Okay? Does that make sense to you? Well, this is what's happening here. And in fact, if you read this, it seems as if both have forgotten who the Creator was. But Moshe has been sent to introduce or to reintroduce him. And if you read it, Yahweh makes a statement. He says, the Egyptians are going to know who I am. The Egyptians are going to know that I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And when you see these first 3 plagues, you find that the Egyptian magicians were unable to duplicate these miracles, so the power structure now begins to change among the gods of Egypt. If you want to get somebody's attention, you go in and affect the power structure. You deal with the head first. As the head goes, so goes the body. That's why if you want to spoil a house, you come in and bind the strong man. You don't go and deal with the weak one first. You come in and bind the strong man. Then the rest of the house falls prey easily. This is what's happening. Yahweh sends Moshe in, and he tells them, listen, we're going to deal with a pantheon of gods there in Egypt, and we're going to tumble them over one by one so that they'll know who I am. And I'm going to ask you a question. We laugh about the sons of Sheba, the 7 sons of Sheba, and we have a tendency to forget that this individual that they were trying to cast the devil out of says, I know Paul and I know Yeshua, but who are you? And so it leads me to believe that the 7 sons that were trying to cast the devil out of this demonic man didn't have a relationship with Yahweh. And so they're trying to introduce someone to this demonic man that they don't know themselves. And so let me just ask you a question, really basic. How can you sell something that you don't own? Seriously, anybody that's a salesman that's worth anything at all will own the product that they're attempting to sell. It's kind of foolish to try and sell something to me when I ask you, do you own it? Oh, no, excuse me. I wouldn't have that thing. I'm just trying to make a living here. Well, if you don't own it, then why should I buy it from you? Well, it's because I've got children to feed. I've got bills to take care of. Well, if you don't own it, then why should I buy it? Well, if you're going to cast the devil out, you better have the means to do so, or else you're going to leave naked and torn, just like this thing here. Now, let's look at these 3 plagues. Blood. It indicates the Nidah condition of both Egypt and Israel. And then it's followed by the frogs. The word frogs, I want you to pay attention to this. Because it's the word Zephodiah. I love that word. Say it. Zephodiah. It just kind of rolls off your tongue. It's kind of romantic, kind of Zephodiah. It comes from the root of the word Safar and the word Da'ah. The word Safar is interesting because it means to turn about or turn away from, to depart from something. And the word Da'ah means knowledge. And so we see from the natural that he sends a plague of frogs, but the reason he sends a plague of frogs, there's a spiritual reason. It's simply because Israel and Egypt have turned away from the knowledge of Yahweh. They've forgotten him, so Yahweh's trying to get their attention and cause them to make teshuvah and return to the truth. Years ago, Jesse Duplantis did a teaching called One More Night with the Frogs. Well, guess what? We've had 2,000 years with the frogs. We've departed from the knowledge of Yahweh, and our houses are full of Zephaniah. And all we want is one more night. If you don't think I'm telling the truth, you just start talking to people about keeping the Sabbath and returning to the feast and festival of Yahweh and getting rid of the pagan idols, and you'll see how much they love the frogs. That's what's happening here. The next was the lice. And it's interesting because this word not lice is translated hen. Gnats, a swarm. But this word can also indicate something that stands upright, to establish a base or a foundation. It comes from a root word that means to demonstrate intimacy by calling someone by their name. Are you hearing me? Who is Yahweh? Well, if they departed from the truth and yet they're guilty of calling someone else by name, who was it that they're calling by name? Who is it that Yahweh's trying to deal with? Yahweh's dealing with the counterfeit gods. And so it's evident that Israel and Egypt have been intimate with these pagan gods and have been calling them by name, departing from the truth. And so Yahweh's whipping some folks and getting their attention. You see that? That's why you have the first couple of commandments. I'm Yahweh your Elohim that brought you forth out of Egypt. Thou shalt have no other Elohim, no other gods before me. And then he talks about my name. Thou shalt not take my name in vain. If you follow the line of teaching here, it's the same. Yahweh's teaching these people here about the commandments. That's what he's trying to teach them. Now, the first judgments here deal with the unclean condition of Israel and Egypt, who have left the knowledge of truth, Torah, and became intimate with the other gods of idolatry. And again, a reference here in the notes to the first and second commandments. Thou shalt have no other Elohim before me, no other gods, and you shall not take the name of Yahweh in vain. Now, all my life I was taught that means cuss. And that's from Southern term. It means to curse. How foul language. Well, if you read this in the Hebrew language, it's indicating you need to know what my name's for. You don't need to use my name without understanding its purpose. You don't need to make my name common. In other words, if you invoke my name, you have to understand that I'm going to show up on the scene. And if you invoke Yahweh into a place, if you're not right at the time, there's something going to happen to you first. You with me? And you see the number 4 here in the numeric values. It just happens that number 4 is the letter that represents the dollar, the doorway. And it's no accident that this next plague is the first plague, and it's at this 4th plague, the doorway, where Yahweh begins to make a distinction between Egypt and Israel. The word for sever here, I will sever between Israel and Egypt, is the word palah. And it means to make a distinction between peoples or places, but it indicates to demonstrate by separating them miraculously. And I think that we should expect the same thing. I think we should expect Yahweh to make a distinction between us and the rest of the world miraculously. Now, if you understand what's going to happen, it doesn't mean that you're just going to sit on your laurels, your past accomplishments, or the accomplishments of those who went on before you, and expect that miraculous intervention. It means that you're going to have to know what Yahweh's word means so that you can speak it and invoke him on the scene, and it's the miraculous appearance of Yahweh that then distinguishes whether or not you're part of the house or you're part of the people. Does that make sense? The next set of plagues. Flies, a grievous murrain or diseases, and then bulls. And they're sent in order to establish the real power in the land. The first 3 were to kind of introduce Yahweh to Israel, and he got their attention, by the way. And then as he begins to deal with these insignificant gods and the pantheon of worship that Egypt has, he begins to assert himself. And in fact, if you go back and read it in Exodus 8, verse 22, he tells Moshe to tell Pharaoh that they're going to find out that I am Yahweh in the midst of the earth. And I believe if you could have seen Yahweh manifest, you'd probably have seen him doing this. They're going to know who I am. They're going to know that I am going to make a distinction between my people and those idolatrous worshipers, and they're going to know that I will deliver my people with a mighty hand. That's what he always says. The word for flies is the word arav. It means a swarm, a mixture, something that's incessant and constantly in motion. It comes from a root word. Listen to this. All you think about is something that's kind of flitting around and it's just aggravating you because it's constantly in motion, constantly in motion. But it also can indicate to be a pledge or to be a guarantor for something, to be a surety for something. Now you think about that for a second. You think about that because that was part of the plague that was addressed by this judgment that Yahweh sent. Evidently something had been going on in the life of these Egyptians that had caused them to become surety or a guarantor for something that was going on with the house of Israel. And Yahweh was about to make a distinction between his people and Egypt. Okay? The next plague is the one that fell on the cattle, and it's described in English as a very grievous murrain. The King James English is poetic at times, but it doesn't do justice to what is said here in the Hebrew language. You want to see what's said in the Hebrew?
Yes.
The phrase very grievous murrain. Say it with me. It's not lemon meringue, by the way. It's meringue. In Hebrew, it's deber kaved meod. Did you notice that? This word deber has the same Hebrew letters as the word debar. Rather than being debar, the promised word, this is deber, a destroying, pestilent word. Did you see that? Let's look at the word ma'od. It means something that's exceeding, something that has force. But the word ma'od, the mem prefix in front of the word ud, indicates a firebrand, something that pokes, prods, and is used to stir up or rake a fire. How many of you have a wood stove or a fireplace? You have a poker that's used to stir the coals up, right? This word here is indicating that something Yahweh's about to do is going to stir the fire. He's going to poke in among the coals and stir something. I love the Hebrew language. Then you have the word kaved. It indicates heavy. It's the same word used for harden. I will kaved, or harden Pharaoh's heart. And finally, this word murrain is translated as deber, which I said earlier, is just the same as the word debar, except the vowel points are different. And so what's being told you here, when he says, I'm going to send a very grievous murrain, he's literally saying that he's going to send a destroying word, and it will be sent for those who rebel against Yahweh. And when Yahweh says, I'll harden Pharaoh's heart, it's hardened simply because he's sending to him the word through Moshe. And when he rebels, the word hardens his heart. Yahweh's word becomes a source of provocation. His word will provoke you. His word will provoke other people. That's why when people get offended with you, when you're speaking the word, they can't do anything about the word because it's truth. And so what they have to do is attack the messenger. His word will prod you. His word will provoke you. Are you with me? You see the word harden used here, and those two different words. And when Yahweh says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, he could have said this, and it would have worked just as well. In fact, it would work better. Yahweh foresaw the end of Pharaoh's actions, that his thoughts would have become dull and heavy toward Moshe and the Torah. And that caused his heart to be hardened. Y'all see that? Did you see that? Did you see that? Is anybody in here? I quoted to you earlier, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10, when Yahweh said that in the last days, because they love not the truth, that he's going to send strong delusion. Go back and look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. And then the final plague is the plague known as boils. It's spelled Shin, Chet, Yod, Nun, Shechin. And it's translated as a serious skin disease. But if you look at the Shin, Chet root, which hints at something that's humble or meek, it also indicates the ideas, the thoughts, the imaginations. And if you add the Bob Noon suffix, it means to diminish it, to make it small. And so the idea seems here that this plague is sent specifically to destroy the haughty, prideful thoughts and attitudes of the Egyptians, particularly Pharaoh. There are many people, myself included, that believe that these boils were a form of leprosy. And the rabbis teach that leprosy arises out of lashon hara, an evil tongue. Everybody look at me. Did you hear what I just said? It indicates that these physical maladies that we saw demonstrated here came as a direct result of an evil tongue, of not only the one that's speaking it, but the individuals that receive what had been spoken to them. They break out of leprosy. Think about that. It's my contention, and I'm not scared, and I'm just going to say it. I fully believe that the Hebrew roots community has been nothing short of a leper colony. Excuse me, is anybody there? Why? Because of the lashon hara, because of the evil tongue that has been running amok in the community. And Yahweh's trying to get us to understand that these words have power. There's life and death in the power of the tongue, and we've got to learn how to speak His word properly. Change ourselves, change our situation, change the lives of others, and not receive the lies that are spoken against you. You've got to learn how to cast down the thoughts that are sent your direction, and you cannot entertain the thoughts, because if you entertain the thoughts, they become imaginations. And if you continue to meditate on those thoughts, those imaginations become strongholds. It's Mark chapter 4, the parable of the sower. Some read 30, some read 60, some read 100. Thoughts are 30, imaginations are 60, and strongholds are 100. And you need help to get delivered when you have a stronghold in your life. Don't let your words become a stronghold. Don't let somebody else's words become something that handcuff you. Say amen right there. Amen. The children of Israel had been in bondage because the words were spoken. Think about that. Pharaoh said himself to all of his people in positions of power, said, there are a lot more of these Israelites than we are. They had them outnumbered. Think about that. If you have a group of people and they far outnumber you, then what do you got to do? You've got to engage in psychological warfare. First of all, you've got to pump yourself up, and then you have to demean those others so that you can change the mindset of those that are going to subjugate these people and those that are being subjugated. Both have to have their mindset changed. In this country, you've been taught that we're a silent minority, that our word doesn't matter. Isn't that true? Well, I submit that that's a bald-faced lie. That if Yahweh's for us, then who can be against us? In my opinion, they're far more with us than they are against. Amen. We've got to learn how to change things. Amen? Yeah. By the way, that word there, shechin, it's used 3 times in Exodus, and a total of 9 times in Torah. And it just so happens that the first time it's used is in Exodus 9, verse 9. There's a combination of 3s for you. Just an accident, just coincidental. The message of these plagues deal with mixing, compromising the debar, the word of truth of Yahweh, causing it to become a source of destruction in the form of an evil tongue, and it's used to destroy self and others by separating them from Yahweh, who's the king over the earth. Yahweh said, I came to prove I'm the king in the midst of the earth. Well, all you got to do is change what's coming out of your mouth, and it doesn't matter if he is king of the earth. He won't be king where you're at. We sing the song, Yahweh reign. Well, if he's not reigning here, then how can he be king in your life? It has to do with the words that come out of our mouth. That's what we've got to change. Let's look at the 7th plague. Can y'all hold on a little while? Yeah. The 7th plague, the 7th judgment, was fiery hail. Some of you familiar with that one. You've had nothing but fiery hell lately. Hello? But it was interesting because I look at this word here for hell, and it's the word barad. Come back and look at it. Strong number 1259. Look at how it's spelled. Beit resh dalet. Isn't that interesting? That's the word debar backwards. Beit resh dalet. Isn't that interesting? It's just not really backwards. They're just the same letters, dalet, resh, beit. So what are you trying? Are you trying to tell me that this physical manifestation of these hailstones, that it was just really the word of Yahweh raining down on the people? Well, let's investigate this a little bit. I'm convinced that the things that you see in the natural, first of all, are real in the spirit realm. And there are things that are manifested in the spirit realm that come about as a direct result of the spoken word of Yahweh that's released. So if you can start seeing that, and you can start changing things by speaking Yahweh's word. Let's look at the root stem of this word, barad. It's resh dalet. And it hints at exercising dominion, subjugating, to subdue something, to beat it down. Isn't that interesting? Because the hail does just that. It beats down and destroys and subjugates the barley crop. Isn't that interesting? Now this is a seventh plague, am I right? You know what's about to come, the ultimate judgment. How many of you know what the ultimate judgment is? It's the destruction of the firstborn, right? Did you know that the firstborn is the barley crop? Born the harvest. Fruit come first. The firstborn came first, then you had the wheat harvest. Y'all see that? So the purpose of this hail right here, Yahweh's sending, he's trying to get Pharaoh's attention. He's so merciful. He's saying, look, Doc, I want you to understand here what I'm about to do. I'm sending my word. I'm sending this hail. I'm about to deal with the firstborn. I'm going to show you. I'm going to demonstrate it in the crops first. I'm going to destroy the firstborn in your crops first. To show you that I can take out your firstborn. If you deal with the firstborn, you destroy your lineage. You destroy your inheritance. You deal with their name. Are you with me? If you say you don't know the name of Yahweh, then the thing for him to do is to destroy your name, so that your name is no longer known. And if I remove your progeny, your name ceases. You see that? The seventh judgment comes on the heels of Yahweh proving who he is, and that he's sovereign over the land. And he's about to subdue his enemies even further. And it comes on the heels of hardening the hearts of Pharaoh and the Egyptians because they reject Yahweh. So it brings us to these final three plagues that are in this Torah portion. The plagues are eventually going to break the resistance of Pharaoh. And it's eventually going to force them to acknowledge Yahweh as sovereign with no other gods before him. And I thought, isn't that odd? Because the first thing he does is he goes to Mount Sinai and he takes a group of people that he just taught these principles, that he was sovereign and we should have no other gods before him. That's the first thing, and he has to deal with all over. It's interesting how easy it is to get Israel out of Egypt. But it took a long time to get Egypt out of Israel. And we talk about, as Hebrew roots, we talk about how we've come out of Egypt, but yet we still evidently still have some Egypt in us because the Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, is still something that has to be dealt with. Come on now. Are you hearing me? Let's look at the final three. Can y'all hold on? It starts with one, locust, arbe. It does mean locust, it's translated as that, but it means more than that. It means, it's a root that means to lie in wait, to ambush. Oh. When I saw that, I'm thinking, you know what? It's telling me Yahweh's about to ambush the Egyptians. That's what this word literally is telling me. This plague is sent to set up an ambush. You know what an ambush is? An ambush is kind of like a snare. A snare and just a regular trap are different. Did y'all know that? What's the difference between a snare and a trap? A trap, you just set anywhere, hoping somebody falls into it. But a snare or an ambush you set because you try and get in the head of the individual that you set the snare for, or that you're about to ambush. And you know that according to their habits, that they're going to come this way. And so, because they've been accustomed to doing things a certain way, you set the snare there, knowing that all you have to do is set it, they're going to fall into it. You set an ambush because you're expecting people to come a certain way. And this is what Yahweh, He knows what's been going on. He knows Pharaoh in the land of Egypt, they're going to go a certain direction. And so He's going to set this ambush, and it's progressively going to continue to deal with the people's heart. And it looks as if it's to just harden their heart so they'll be damned and sent to an eternal fire. But that's not what's happening. Yahweh's sending this hoping, because of their nature, He's hoping that He can make their heart pliable and malleable, that they'll hear these things and they'll see the pestilence and the judgments, and their heart will be softened. That's what Yahweh's trying to do. And by the way, He ambushed you. He has ambushed you to try and get you to the place where you hear His word and hear His heart. The numeric value of Arbe is 208. It just happens that it's the same as the word Yitzhak for Isaac, the promised seed. The first time you see this word used is in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, where Yahweh tells Chava or Eve that He's going to greatly multiply her sorrow. The word sorrow there is Itzavon. And if you look at the root of it, the ayin zadi bed, it hints at making or forming idols. Did you hear what I just said? Yahweh's telling Eve that He's going to deal with her in great sorrow because she had a habit of forming idols. How so? She set the Nakash up in front of her husband and then in front of Yahweh. So He has to deal with Eve's idolatry. And fast forward to where He's at here, He's having to deal with the idolatry, not only of the Egyptians, but the children of Israel. And He continues to deal with idolatry as long as they're in the wilderness. Do you see that? The connection then to Isaac, the promised seed, is like the promised seed to Adam. And this particular plague sounds a final warning. Yahweh's telling the children of Israel, what I'm about to do, I'm about to deal with the firstborn of Pharaoh. I'm about to deal with Pharaoh's promised seed. You're the promised seed of Yahweh. In fact, Yahweh made the statement, Israel was my son. And so if He's their son, then if they're His son, and they are the promised seed, and then it's natural that He would deal with the promised seed of Egypt. And so He's trying to get it in Pharaoh's head, but by all of these demonstrations of His power, I'm setting up an ambush. If you don't deal with your rebellion, if you don't deal with your idolatry, if you don't acknowledge Me as sovereign in the earth and call Me by My name, I'm going to cut off the promised seed. So Yahweh's just not going to catch you in blindside you and cut you off and damn you to eternity. He doesn't do that. He's merciful, He's loving, and He gives every one of us multitudes, myriads of opportunities, but there comes a day when judgment is going to be rendered. Okay? There's another ominous connection to this word arbe. If you look at Gesenius' Hebrew lexicon for this word locus, it said it can indicate also that this word means floodgates. And there's a connection in this word arbe to Arba, the ancient giant of renown. Isn't that interesting? Because in Revelation 9, when you start seeing this plague happen, you see that the pits open up. And out of the pit, what happens? You see the locusts come out of the pits. The Nephilim, the fallen ones, are going to come out of the pits in the last days. I'm convinced that the bottomless pit has already been opened just recently. And I think that that's one of the reasons that you see the enemy doing everything they can with these super colliders, CERN, and all of these other things to open up portals and gateways. Why? It's the same thing as Jannes and Jambres trying to manufacture the power and miracles of Yahweh. And Yahweh's going to use His name and His great power to prove who He is. Amen. The next plague is the plague of darkness. This is the word Hoshek. Say that with me. Hoshek. It means darkness, but I love this. Listen to this. This is the ninth plague. This is the one before the hammer really falls. And I want you to think about how Yahweh's dealing with Egypt right now. I believe with all my heart that Yahweh's really grieved in His spirit, because He does not want to destroy. There's no telling how many thousands of people. I believe that. This word Hoshek also means to hold back or to restrain. The ninth letter or ninth number indicates the cessation of man and his judgment is about to fall. But it also is indicating, in my opinion, this ninth plague, this plague of darkness, and it's described as a thick darkness. I believe it's a final extension of the mercy of Yahweh. And I believe that what he's trying to do, he's trying to avoid the destruction of the firstborn of Egypt. And he's restraining himself one last time. Rather than arbitrarily sending out the destroyer, he's sending a plague of darkness, hoping that this phenomenal 3-day plague, where the darkness is so real and thick and tangible that it can be felt, he's hoping that it will change the heart of Egypt and Pharaoh. And so he does that to restrain himself one more time, to keep from having to unleash judgment on the earth. That's what I believe is happening here. And if you study it, it's the same darkness that stood between Egypt and Israel when they were about to cross over the Red Sea. And if you go back and look at it a little bit further in the book of Exodus, you'll see it's the same darkness that was on the top of Mount Sinai. For some, darkness may be judgment. For others, darkness is deliverance. And there are times when darkness is sent, and it seems like in your life it's an insurmountable darkness, that it's so powerful and palatable and touchable and real, that the darkness is so encumbered you that you can't see anything. There's no light. But Yahweh said that there was light in his people's house. And it's Yahweh that sometimes sends the darkness so that he can segregate between his people and those that are the enemies of the house. Amen. I can just kind of hear, if there were music linked to this scene, you can kind of hear the tempo of the music turning up. And you can kind of sense that there's an escalation taking place here. We just had the ninth plague. We're about to go into the destruction of the first one. Yahweh tells them that. And all of a sudden you have a parenthetical interruption. Boom, changes. He interrupts the flow of the message regarding the 10th and the final judgment. And then he stops and he tells Israel, I want you to go and borrow from your neighbors. Isn't that interesting? How many of you have just looked at that phrase, go borrow from your neighbors? You ever looked at it? I bet you're going to see something this morning you probably haven't seen before, okay? But what I want to do is, before we get there, I want to tell you why Yahweh's having the children of Israel to go and deal with the source of wealth of the Egyptians. Can I do that? It just happens that there's a goddess of wealth. And that goddess of wealth was also known as she who rears. She was a quote-unquote cobra goddess of nursing or rearing children. She was the fertility and protector of the Pharaoh. Isn't that interesting? She was known as the nursing snake. She was not only a goddess who sometimes was shown nursing a child, but she was one that offered her protection to Pharaoh in the land of the dead. She was thought to be the goddess who gave a child his or her true name. You don't know Yahweh's name? Guess what? It's going to cut your name off. Do you know that there are places today that people have, among civilizations, that they don't even mention the name of a person after they've expired for fear that mentioning the name of that person will take away their ability to go into eternity? And there are certain civilizations today that if they have an enemy, they don't want the enemy to know their name, because if you speak the name, or if your name is spoken by an enemy, that person has power over you. It's real and it's tangible. If you don't think so, ask the Native Americans. You hear me? It's believed that if the image of the dead and the name of the dead were obliterated, then the deceased soul would also be destroyed. And so by doing away with this goddess who named the firstborn of Pharaoh and his death, the soul, the spiritual connection is broken off. If someone knew the true name of a person, then that person had power over them. Every name was important to the ancient Egyptians. And that's why Pharaoh declared, who is Yahweh, that I should obey his voice? And it's the reason that Yahweh reveals this specific name to Moshe before he sends him in to do battle. Did you know that the goddess of wealth is extremely powerful today? Did you know that the snake goddess has literally, and I'm just going to take a short aside, did you know that the snake goddess called the Kundalini spirit has literally infiltrated a lot of Christian and charismatic and Pentecostal churches today? Did y'all know that? If you didn't, you need to start looking and researching it. And it's being called the Spirit of Yahweh. Why? He sent them to borrow from their neighbors. Would y'all like to know what that means in Hebrew? If you go borrow something, you're kind of asking, right? Can I just share something with you? Their neighbors were pretty much subjugated at this particular point, right? And they're kind of wanting them to get out. It hasn't really come to that yet. But I can imagine that the feelings between the children of Israel and their neighbors really weren't too good, right? It's translated as to ask, borrow, or beg, but it's a poor translation, and in my opinion, the text bears out what I'm about to tell you. It actually, in my opinion, this word means to beg, to literally to demand, and it's cognate with the word sahela, which is a word that means to render a decision, a verdict, or a decree. It means to render a decision at a court of law. And what Israel is being told here, the King James English watered it down. What Israel is being told is you go in and you demand what is rightfully yours. You're talking about the children of Israel. They were a subjugated people. Everything that had been theirs had been taken by the Egyptians. And so what Yahweh's telling you, go tell them that you want what's yours and you want it back now. Let me ask you, when's the last time you demanded what was yours? Thank you, sir. Well, let's go borrow from our neighbor. Well, look at this word neighbor. I said, wait a minute, there's something up here because it's the word re'ah, Strong's number 7453, and it's translated neighbor, but if you look at it, it's the word that means to shout, to roar, or to thunder. And so when I read this, instead of saying it, go borrow from your neighbor, it seems to me that it says, you go demand with a powerful thundering roar what rightfully is yours, and you take it and pack it up and get ready to get out of here. If you want to go borrow from your neighbor, you can let your passive, don't get involved, don't rock my boat attitude hinder you, and you'll never get out of Egypt. If you do get out of Egypt, you'll get out by the skin of your teeth, and you'll always be one of those hangers-on around the camp, having to have a handout. Yahweh is determined that you can get what's rightly yours, but you've got to get aggressive with it. You can't push the foot around to the devil. He's going to kill you. He's going to kill you graveyard dead. And that's what John 10:10 says. He came to steal, kill, and destroy. What part of that you have a difficulty understanding? Let's look at the final play. It's death of the firstborn. The word bakor is the word for firstborn. It's the destruction of the seed. And by the way, I want to share something with you. And you can go and research this for yourself. There was an ancient Egyptian text that predated the Exodus prophecy, or the Exodus encounter here. And this ancient prophecy said that the king will be judged with him whose name is hidden on that day of the slaying of the firstborn. It was foretold what was going to happen before this happened. And it's interesting because here in this story you see that the hidden name had been revealed to Moshe at the burning bush. And the one whose name had been hidden, Yahweh himself, Yahweh Tzava'ot, Yahweh of hosts, the one who was the commander and the captain, it's he and he alone that is responsible for the slaying of the firstborn males of Egypt. By the way, that word bakor has a numeric value of 228. It's divisible by 3. Something's happened here. The destruction of the goddess of wealth left Pharaoh without a protector, and it opened up the door for the death of cutting off of Pharaoh's name and his lineage. Yet there was another lineage that was about to be restored. Do y'all see that? You remember when Moshe goes into Pharaoh the final time, and Pharaoh says, don't look on if you ever see my face again, it's a death sentence, right? And then Moshe says, you've spoken right because I'll never see your face again, but it's also kind of contradictory because later he goes back in and sees it. Am I right? If you look at this in Hebrew, when Moshe replies and says, I will see your face no more, it's lo, asaf, od, reot, panecha. Did you see it? And what it's literally saying is that you will not see the face of Joseph again. Oh, Joseph Kai. Joseph still lives. Yeah, there's a battle between the sea line. That's what this whole confrontation between Pharaoh and Moshe is about. And there's a struggle for a pure lineage that's going to produce the Messiah. And you're the Esaf generation, the Yosef generation. Why? Because Yosef means, I'll do it again. Yahweh made you a promise. I will do it again. And you're going to see the name of Yahweh once again. People are going, with the restoration of language simultaneously, Yahweh's restoring his name. Why? So that the Pharaoh who he is. But that's not good enough. That's not good enough. He's going to cause his name to be made great again in the earth, and he's going to prove who slaves have to come. That's why hard times have to come. Economic devastation has to come. Wars and rumors of wars and literal war and famine has to come so that he can prove I am sovereign in the earth. And that's what he's about to do. He's going to bring a pure lineage out of a place known as Egypt. He's raising up a group of people that are going to know what it is to speak his word. You speak his word. I believe in that with all this. You can do, or a few of us. This is something that all of us as a congregation can do. We've got to discipline ourselves to do it. We've got to speak the word. We've got to be instant in season and out of season. We've got to speak the word. And we've got to demonstrate the word. If you can't do that, you're left behind. And this left behind series is not going to be a do-over. You hear me? Yahweh's got plans for you. And those plans are for good and not for evil to bring you to a destination. Hope you've enjoyed this teaching.